Chapter 11, Part 2. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Lizzie Driver. The Talisman by Sir Walter Scott. Chapter 11, Part 2. The critical hour had arrived, at which the physician, according to the rules of his art, had predicted that his royal patient might be awakened with safety, and the sponge had been applied for that purpose. And the leech had not made many observations ere he assured the Baron of Gilsland that the fever had entirely left his sovereign, and that, such was the happy strength of his constitution, it would not even be necessary, as in most cases, to give a second dose of the powerful medicine. Richard himself seemed to be of the same opinion, for, sitting up and rubbing his eyes, he demanded of De Vaux what present sum of money was in the royal coffers. The Baron could not exactly inform him of the amount. "It matters not," said Richard, "be it greater or smaller, bestow it all on this learned leech, who hath, I trust, given me back again to the service of the Crusade. If it be less than 1,000 byzants, let him have jewels to make it up." "I saw not the wisdom with which Allah has endowed me," answered the Arabian physician. "And be it known to you, great Prince, that the divine medicine of which you have partaken would lose its effects in my unworthy hands did I exchange its virtues either for gold or diamonds." "The physician refuseth a gratuity," said De Vaux to himself. "This is more extraordinary than his being 100 years old." "Thomas de Vaux," said Richard, "thou knowest no courage but what belongs to the sword, no bounty and virtue but what are used in chivalry. I tell thee that this Moor, in his independence, might set an example to them who account themselves the flower of knighthood." "It is reward enough for me," said the Moor, folding his arms on his bosom, and maintaining an attitude at once respectful and dignified, "that so great a king as the Melech Ric should thus speak of his servant." Richard was thus called by the Eastern nations. "But now let me pray you again to compose yourself on your couch, for though I think there needs no further repetition of the divine draught, yet injury might ensue from any too early exertion ere your strength be entirely restored." "I must obey thee, Hakim," said the King; "yet believe me, my bosom feels so free from the wasting fire which for so many days hath scorched it, that I care not how soon I expose it to a brave man's lance. But hark! What mean these shouts and that distant music in the camp? Go, Thomas de Vaux, and make inquiry." "It is the Archduke Leopold," said De Vaux, returning after a minute's absence, "who makes, with his pot companions, some procession through the camp." "The drunken fool!" exclaimed King Richard. "Can he not keep his brutal inebriety within the veil of his pavilion, that he must needs show his shame to all Christendom? What say you, Sir Marquis?" he added, addressing himself to Conrade of Montserrat, who at that moment entered the tent. "This much, honoured Prince," answered the Marquis, "that I delight to see your Majesty so well and so far recovered, and that is a long speech for any one to make who has partaken of the Duke of Austria's hospitality." "What! You have been dining with the Teutonic wineskin?" said the monarch. "And what frolic has he found out to cause all this disturbance? Truly, Sir Conrade, I have still held you so good a reveller that I wonder at your quitting the game." De Vaux, who had got a little behind the King, now exerted himself by look and sign to make the Marquis understand that he should say nothing to Richard of what was passing without. But Conrade understood not, or heeded not, the prohibition. "What the Archduke does," he said, "is of little consequence to anyone, least of all to himself, since he probably knows not what he is acting. Yet, to say truth, it is a gamble I should not like to share in, since he is pulling down the banner of England from St. George's Mount, in the centre of the camp yonder, and displaying his own in its stead." "What sayest thou?" exclaimed the King, in a tone which might have waked the dead. "Nay," said the Marquis, "let it not chafe your highness that a fool should act according to his folly." "Speak not to me," said Richard, springing from his couch, and casting on his clothes with a dispatch which seemed marvellous. "Speak not to me, Lord Marquis. De Multon, I command thee, speak not a word to me. He that breathes but a syllable is no friend to Richard Plantagenet. Hakim, be silent, I charge thee." All this while the King was hastily clothing himself, and, with the last word, snatched his sword from the pillar of the tent, and without any other weapon, or calling any attendants, he rushed out of his pavilion. Conrade, holding up his hands as if in astonishment, seemed willing to enter into conversation with De Vaux. But Sir Thomas pushed rudely past him, and calling to one of the royal equerries, said hastily, "Fly to Lord Salisbury's quarters, and let him get his men together and follow me instantly to St. George's Mount. Tell him the King's fever has left his blood and settled in his brain." Imperfectly heard, and still more imperfectly comprehended by the startled attendant whom De Vaux addressed thus hastily, the equerry and his fellow servants of the royal chamber rushed hastily into the tents of the neighbouring nobility, and quickly spread an alarm, as general as the cause seemed vague, through the whole British forces. The English soldiers, waked in alarm from that noonday rest which the heat of the climate had taught them to enjoy as a luxury, hastily asked each other the cause of the tumult, and, without waiting an answer, supplied by the force of their own fancy the want of information. Some said the Saracens were in the camp, some that the King's life was attempted, some that he had died of the fever the preceding night, many that he was assassinated by the Duke of Austria. The nobles and officers, at an equal loss with the common men to ascertain the real cause of the disorder, laboured only to get their followers under arms and under authority, lest their rashness should occasion some great misfortune to the crusading army. The English trumpets sounded loud, shrill, and continuously. The alarm cry of "Bows and bills, bows and bills," was heard from quarter to quarter, again and again shouted, and again answered by the presence of the ready warriors and their national invocation, "St. George for merry England." The alarm went through the nearest quarter of the camp, and men of all the various nations assembled, where perhaps every people in Christendom had their representatives, flew to arms and drew together under circumstances of general confusion, of which they knew neither the cause nor the object. It was, however, lucky, amid a scene so threatening, that the Earl of Salisbury, while he hurried after De Vaux's summons, with a few only of the readiest English men at arms, directed the rest of the English host to be drawn up and kept under arms, to advance to Richard's succour, if necessity should require, but in fit array and under due command, and not with the tumultuary haste which their own alarm and zeal for the King's safety might have dictated. In the meanwhile, without regarding for one instant the shouts, the cries, the tumult which began to thicken around him, Richard, with his dress in the last disorder, and his sheathed blade under his arm, pushed his way with the utmost speed, followed only by De Vaux and one or two household servants, to St. George's Mount. He outsped even the alarm which his impetuosity only had excited, and passed the quarter of his own gallant troops of Normandy, Poitou, Gascony, and Anjou before the disturbance had reached them, although the noise accompanying the German revel had induced many of the soldiery to get on foot to listen. The handful of Scots were also quartered in the vicinity, nor had they been disturbed by the uproar. But the King's person and his haste were most remarked by the Knight of the Leopard, who, aware that danger must be afoot, and hastening to share in it, snatched his shield and sword, and united himself to De Vaux, who, with some difficulty, kept pace with his impatient and fiery master. De Vaux answered a look of curiosity which the Scottish knight directed towards him, with a shrug of his broad shoulders, and they continued, side by side, to pursue Richard's steps. The King was soon at the foot of St. George's Mount, the sides as well as platform of which were now surrounded and crowded, partly by those belonging to the Duke of Austria's retinue, who were celebrating with shouts of jubilee the act which they consider